Good afternoon. Welcome to Kent City Council Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, February 18th. And we have, first up, we have roll call. Kim, may we have roll call, please?
Thank you, Council President. Council President Kaur,
Here.
Councilmember Boyce,
Here.
Councilmember Boyd,
Here.
Councilmember Fincher,
Here.
Councilmember Larmer, Councilmember Michaud,
Here.
Councilmember Troutner.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Agenda approvals. Any changes to the agenda? If none, may I have a motion, please?
So move. Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you so much. Next up, we have approval of minutes for Committee of the Whole from February 4. May I have a motion, please?
So move. Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? If none, may I have an approval, please?
Aye.
Sorry.
I'm not sure what you're asking, but aye.
Thank you. Approval for minutes passes. Next up, payment of bills. We have seen this coming through our email.
So move. Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, now we have amendment with Carl Warren and Company for third-party claims administration, and we have Elaine. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council President Kaur and council members. Elaine Wee, Risk Manager for the City of Kent. I'm here today to request that the City Council authorize the mayor to sign a contract amendment with Carl Warren. By way of background, Carl Warren is the city's third-party administrator for its general liability claims. The city began contracting with Carl Warren back in 2011. In 2014, the city entered into an agreement with Carl Warren for a term of 3 years with an option to extend the term for another 3 years through 2019. In 2020, an amendment was executed to extend the term of the January 2014 agreement for an additional 3 years with another option for another 3 years, which would have ended or which will end in December 31st of 2025. The amendment, however, did not include the pricing and the cost breakdown for the third option year. Throughout the term of this amendment, the cost for this contract has increased 2% each year. Risk Management requests that the City Council authorize the mayor to execute a contract amendment with Carl Warren for the third option year in the amount of $62,069.04. This cost was included in the 25-26 biennium budget, and it's budgeted under liability, risk management, other professional services.
Thank you, Elaine. Any questions? Councilmember Boyce.
So it is for like I'm not sure, forgot the word for a minute. Like if someone make a claim against the city and it's a third party, it's not work or comp, but it's.
We also have a third-party administrator for workers' comp, but this is for general liability
General
claims.
liability, gotcha.
So these are the claims that are filed with the city clerk.
Yep. Yep.
Car accidents.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So this contract ends December 31st, so you'll probably be bringing up something.
Yes.
For
So at the end of this
extension.
year, as we prepare for the biennium, mid-biennium adjustment, we'll come back for the next contract that we'll enter into with them.
Sounds good. Any other questions or comments? If none, I'll make a motion. I move to authorize the mayor to sign a contract amendment with Carl Warren and Company and ratify all prior agreements and amendments subject to final terms and conditions acceptable to the city attorney and human resources director.
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we'll be heading over to Councilmember Fincher for Public Works.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're going to hear from David Payne, who has a couple of people from King County who is going to also give us some information on the South Link connection.
Good evening, Council President, Council members. David Payne, City Transportation Planner. Y'all are the most recent workshop. Council received a presentation on a little project on the West Hill, the Link Light Rail improvements. And one of the partnerships we have to follow up in partnership with that conversation is the South Link Connections project. So we've asked Metro to come and speak to the project. We'll hear from the project team and Genevieve Jones. If I could ask the staff to come up, please.
Good evening, Council President Kaur, members of the Kent City Council, Kent City staff, and members of the public. My name is Genevieve Jones, she, her. I work in local government relations. I'm representing our team, particularly Amanda Pleasant Brown. She's our local jurisdictions lead. She couldn't be with us tonight, but she sends her regrets, and we are well represented. So I'll let my team introduce themselves and then kick off the presentation.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicole Aguirre. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a transportation planner at Metro and also the project manager for the SouthLink Connections project.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mahja Shan. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Engagement at King County Metro, so that includes government relations, community engagement, and I'm a Kent resident, which is why I'm here today. So.
Hey.
Hi, everyone. Cristina Gonzalez. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I'm a senior community engagement planner with King County Metro.
So as David mentioned, tonight we'll be talking to you about SouthLink Connections. That's our project to restructure bus service on the south end once the light rail goes all the way to Federal Way. So we're going to go over some background. We'll get into the Kent-specific impacts. We'll go over community engagement, how we've been reaching out to your residents, how the city can get involved, and then take some questions and answers.
All right, I will go ahead and get us started. So as Genevieve said, SouthLink Connections is a restructure project of Metro service in response to the Sound Transit Federal Way link extension. As early as 2026, Sound Transit will be extending the Link 1 line from its current terminal in Angle Lake down to Federal Way. And that extension will include 3 new stations, one at Kent Des Moines by Highline College, another at Star Lake, and then one in downtown Federal Way. So recognizing that this brings a really exciting new high-capacity transit investment to South King County, Metro really wants to take a look at its service to figure out how we can best integrate with the light rail extension and also respond to changing community needs. So as part of this project, Metro is considering changes to a scope of 22 routes. These routes were chosen because of their proximity to a future light rail station or because they provide service into the I-5 corridor to Seattle, which could be considered duplicative of Link Light Rail once it extends down to Federal Way. In terms of our engagement timeline and our overall project timeline, our project is conducting 3 phases of engagement, which really allows us to have an iterative process that builds off of continuous feedback from the community. We started this process back in the spring of 2024 with our phase 1 engagement. And during that phase, our priorities were really to educate the community about this upcoming project, to be able to assess the different transit gaps and mobility needs, and also recruit for our 2 community advisory boards. So first is our mobility board, which is comprised of community members, and the second is our partner review board, which is comprised of folks from jurisdictions, major institutions, major employers, and community-based organizations. And these are 2 boards that we work with throughout the life of our project. All jurisdictions were invited to staff our partner review board, and together these 2 advisory boards helped shape our project priorities and design concepts. These priorities are reflected in our Phase 2 network, which we are currently in the process of sharing with the public through the end of February. What we hear in this Phase 2 engagement will help us further refine the initial concepts, formalizing them into proposed changes that we'll bring back out to the community in the summer of 2025. And we hope to return to this specific venue during Phase 3 to share our updated changes. After that, we'll spend some time to finalize our proposed changes and submit them to the King County Council in the spring of 2026 for their adoption. And we plan to start implementing our changes as early as fall 2026. This slide has some information on all the things that we considered when designing changes to our service. So starting over on the left, we have our data and analysis. So this is all about understanding how people are traveling, where our priority populations live, and also how our current services are performing. Jumping over to the right, we have our capital considerations, and that's all about making sure that whatever we propose is actually operationally feasible on the ground. So can a 60 or 40-foot bus actually go down this street and make this specific turn? Are there spaces at the end of a route for a bus to take a break and an operator to use the restroom? That kind of thing. And then the middle blue bucket is all about using our findings from previous research, as well as everything that we learned in our phase 1 engagement, and working with that mobility board and partner review board to really understand the important connections and destinations in our project area, as well as understand what the prioritized mobility needs are. We have 5 prioritized mobility needs that our mobility board and partner review board helped us land on. And this is really to help us focus on 5 key areas of change within our phase 2 network. We know that this is not by any means an all-inclusive list, but we think it's really helpful for us to have priorities to help guide our process. On these next 2 slides, I'll be walking through some of the highlights of how we're meeting these 5 needs. This is just going to be a high-level overview because in a little bit I will dive into the specific impacts to Kent. So on these tables, on this slide and the next slide, you'll see the 5 mobility needs on the left-hand side and then what's in the phase 2 concept to help meet that need. So the first transit need is greater transit coverage. And to meet that, we are implementing 2 new MetroFlex zones in Federal Way and Auburn. These are pilot zones that we're testing for 2 years, and these zones will help increase the number of people with access to transit, as well as provide connections to major transit hubs. The next is improved early morning and nighttime service. And to meet this, we are proposing to provide earlier and/or later trips on 7 routes throughout our project area. The third is faster transit travel times, both within and beyond our project area. And so to meet that, we are reorienting routes to serve light rail stations where it makes sense to be able to connect folks to that high capacity transit investment. We're also adding 2 new frequent services, and one of them is in Kent, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And in addition to those frequent services, we're also proposing that trips come more often on 5 local routes within our project area. There's also some improved travel time and directness between West Federal Way and downtown Federal Way to kind of straighten out the network in that area as well. Our fourth prioritized mobility need is improved east-west connections. So in order to meet that, we're proposing frequent service on 2 important east-west connections. One is the new Route 164, which would serve the city of Kent, and the other is increasing the current Route 181 to frequent service as well. The 5th mobility need is increased weekend service. So to meet that, there are 2 routes where we're proposing weekend service where it currently doesn't exist today. We're also proposing that trips come more often on 5 routes on weekends and proposing later and/or earlier trips on 6 different routes on weekends. This is perhaps my favorite stat. In total, we are proposing 35% more trips on Saturday and about 75% more trips on Sunday compared to today. Lastly, we're also hoping to match Saturday and Sunday schedules to make sure that folks just have one consistent weekend experience, just to make our service a little bit easier to use and understand. In order to implement these improvements in the SouthLink Connections network, we do recognize that there are trade-offs that need to be made. The Phase 2 network does propose the removal of 10 peak-only routes to be able to reinvest those resources into improving the local all-day network in accordance with those 5 prioritized mobility needs that I just went over. It is important to note that of the 10 peak-only routes that are proposed for removal, 9 of them are currently suspended and not operating today, so riders can't use them. The only peak-only route that is currently operating today that is proposed for removal is the Route 177. In addition, there are also some reductions proposed for unproductive and lower ridership services to use those resources to invest in those prioritized mobility needs. This includes the replacement of a DART route in Federal Way, some trip reductions on the Route 162, which I'll talk about, as well as some stop reductions proposed on the Route 193. So diving into the specific impacts to Kent, I do want to start by saying that there are 6 fixed route routes as well as the Kent Metro Flex Zone that are not part of the SouthLink Connections project scope, so there aren't any changes proposed to those routes. And overall, I would say that the transit service is improved in Kent compared to the service on the ground today. So to go over those at a high level, and then I'll dive into the route-specific information. We are improving the Route 183 with brand new Sunday service. We are proposing to revise the Route 162 by removing 1 morning and 1 evening trip to be able to reinvest those resources into the mobility priorities. We are partially replacing the Route 165 with a brand new Route 164 and proposing that that is frequent service. And we are proposing the removal of Route 157, which is one of those peak-only routes that is currently suspended and not operating. So starting with the Route 183, the Route 183 is a route that goes between Kent Station to Federal Way. And we're proposing that this route would connect to light rail both at the Federal Way downtown station as well as at Star Lake Station. As I mentioned earlier, we are proposing brand new Sunday service where it currently doesn't exist today, as well as proposing that service starts earlier and ends later every day of the week, so improving the span of service of when folks can actually use this route. The next is the Route 162, which is a peak-only route between Lake Meridian and Kent Station to downtown Seattle. We are revising, as I said, to remove 1 a.m. and 1 p.m. trip due to low ridership on those specific trips. This would still leave 13 trips per day on this route, which is pretty robust service for a peak-only route. And again, those resources would be used to be invested into other improvements in the network. The next is the Route 164. So this route would partially replace the current Route 165 between Kent Des Moines Station near Highline College to Kent Station and then terminating over at Green River College. There is another new route called the Route 166 that would partially replace the other half of the Route 165 over to Burien. We decided to propose the split of these routes because we saw pretty drastic differences in the number of riders on each half. This half that you're seeing here, the 164, is much more well utilized than the portion that goes to Burien. And so to meet the demand on this route, we do want this to become frequent service. So during the weekdays, this route would come every 15 minutes during most of the day. On Sundays, this would also come every 30 minutes, which is a big increase over the current 165 today, which comes every hour on Sundays. So that's also an improvement with this route. And with that, I will pass it over to Christina to talk about our Phase 2 engagement.
All right, thank you, Nicole. So as Nicole mentioned, we have been out and about in the community with Phase 1, and now with Phase 2, our website remains the same, so SouthLink Connections. We have the website and the survey to receive feedback and flyers. All those materials and other materials are available in 15 languages. We wanted to make sure that we were providing the information to as many of our communities as possible. And so the languages you can see on the screen: Amharic, Arabic, Chinese, both simplified and traditional, Dari, of course English, French, Korean, Russian, Somali, Spanish, Tagalog, Tigrinya, Ukrainian, and Vietnamese. We've been doing lots of public outreach out in the community, posting at lots of main areas where people travel. We've done participated in the Kent Now podcast. We spoke to the Bicycle Advisory Board. And so we're trying to outreach as much as possible. We have a social media campaign and toolkit that I believe has been sent you all for Phase 1, and again, that is available for you all as well. We have community-based organizations that I'll share in a little bit. Of course, we want to make sure that people communicate in different ways, and we want to connect with organizations that have the ability to connect with folks in a way that's meaningful to them. As Nicole mentioned, our partner review board and our mobility board, we have, I think, at least 5 members that either live, work, or travel a lot through Kent. So you all are definitely very well represented. And of course, with our partner review board members participating in the process. We're engaging lots of city councils and just sharing information as much as possible with folks. And we've held Metro-led open houses. In terms of our partnership, so we actually share information with lots of different community-based organizations, but we've partnered with some specific ones where we're providing financial resources and other materials to make sure that we are engaging with communities in a way that's culturally responsive. And of course, we're trying to gather as much information in terms of feedback, in terms of how it impacts them. So you can see, I believe in the areas near Kent, we've got Utopia, and I believe it's the IRC that's it's close to Kent as well. And it's very short in terms of outreach, but if you wanted any more specific information, happy to answer any questions, and I will kick it back off to Genevieve.
Thank you. So as for how cities can get involved, you yourselves are welcome to take this survey by February 28th, next Friday, where we're looking to get community feedback about the proposed network. You can use the social media toolkit that was hopefully sent to you to post on social media, to put a blurb in your newsletter, communicate with your constituents about taking the survey. You can support the continued participation in city staff and the partner review board. David has been wonderful. I think Kent even hosted one of our partner review board meetings. And you are always welcome to reach out to either Amanda or myself with questions about the project. And with that, we are happy to take questions.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Larmer, followed by Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I do have a question. Route 157, was that the one that ran from Kent Kangley and then down 212? Mm-hmm. Okay, so today, if I'm a student at Kent Ridge and I graduate and want to take classes at Highline, I live obviously along 212. How do I get to Highline?
Yeah, we definitely are looking at other alternatives for that area. I think it may be, I need to double check, but I think it may be within the bounds of the Metro Flex Zone, and so folks could connect to other services to get them not just to Green River College, but all over Kent and South King County from Kent Station. So that is one thing that I think they would be able to do.
Okay, so there's also a large percent of seniors in that area that are not going to use an app. So do you guys have plans for service outside of Flex?
As part of our fixed route, as part of our Phase 2 network, no, not at this time. But if that is something that is a priority for the City of Kent, we will definitely take that feedback for consideration in our Phase 3 network.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Madam President. These surveys, I mean, I get it, I understand it, but how do we know we are reaching out to the right people that's just going to impact? I mean, to me, this probably quite a few people don't even know about this here. I just wonder, how do you, and I know that's a hard thing to do, but how do you do that before the implementation phase?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that we are working very closely with community-based organizations and councils and networks. So, and trying to reach as many people as possible, recognizing, right, that folks are connected in lots of different ways. We're at bus stops. I didn't mention that earlier, but we are at like transit centers and bus stops when we have a lot of ridership that we know, so that then we're trying to communicate with people in as many ways as possible. That's why we also extended the number of languages that all of our materials are in, because we recognize that our communities are very diverse. And so I think between that and really spreading the word through our connections, and then as y'all, as city council folks and our members from our partner review board and our major institutions have been sharing that. So both as like employers to employees, the neighbors to neighbors, our mobility board is also spreading the word. And so definitely it's always a challenge to try to reach everyone. And then we also recognize that not everyone takes a survey. And so that's why we're working with community-based organizations to have conversations over a meal, or, you know, and involve these conversations in other projects. And so that's like my broad response.
And that's good. Thank you, and I appreciate that. Do you know roughly for your phase one, I mean, what was your numbers on survey? 1,000 people, 2,000 actually?
Yeah, the surveys, if I remember, is a little bit less than 2,000. And then we also created a mini survey that then we knew that, you know, when we were out in the bus stops, where then we were asking people and collecting that data. And we also did interviews with community-based organizations that we know engage with lots of communities. And so also paying them for their services and letting us know what do folks in your community do to travel? Is there a particular place that maybe we haven't, folks don't have access to, that we want to make sure that maybe we're making some changes around that?
Yeah, okay, yeah. And my last question is, you implement this your plan, right? And then you find that something's not quite aligned, not working right, do you have the flexibility to go in and make those changes, I'm assuming?
Yes, definitely. And that's why we do a 3-phase approach. You want to talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay,
And
great.
then we're thinking about like post-implementation, so after the service change, if I'm hearing the question correctly. We do plan to do a post-implementation study, so we do want to give the services some time to kind of be socialized within the community so that folks actually know what's on the ground and what's available. And so I think we're planning about 2 years after implementation to kind of study how ridership and how folks are responding to the changes, and to see if there are any tweaks that need to be made. So we do have that in our plans.
Thank you so much. Definitely a good thing, right? We want to have people have ability to be able to move around within the city and so on. So appreciate all the work you guys are doing. So thank you.
And then I just wanted to clarify that this current phase is a 3-part phase so that we can hear needs, create a plan based on those needs, right? Then come out for community. Is this terrible? Is this wonderful? What's the feedback? Then we're making changes based on that feedback, and we come back for phase 3 and then afterwards. And so we're really trying to create lots of ways that we can make sure that we're really connecting with the needs of community.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Fincher, followed by Troutner.
Thank you very much. My part is also on the reaching out to communities. I'm guessing that this was just a sampling of community organizations, but we definitely have some organizations that it would be excellent for you guys to reach, because especially the number of bus riders, people who do not have cars, who would utilize the services of a Metro that need to be in Sound Transit, both, that need to be considered. So how do we get you the names? And just off the top of my head, I came up with 6 more that weren't there that would be good for you to reach out to.
Yeah.
And there's more.
I think Genevieve will follow up. I will share that when we were starting, we did ask councils, like, who are organizations or groups that we want to make sure that we're reaching out to. And if my memory serves me correct, I'm pretty sure that we got some from Kent, but I want to make sure that your 6 are included in that, and if not, then that certainly you or anybody else, if you make sure that you're connecting with this employer, this community-based organization, this church that does a lot of work with folks around transportation. Genevieve will send out an email with our social media toolkit and with that ask again, so that then we can make sure we have those organizations.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. I just have a comment. I want to thank you all for being here and sharing this information. It's really important. I think something that needs to be said is during the pandemic, we saw strong ridership in Kent, and even coming out of the pandemic, I think more than any other cities in our region. So I think expanding these routes and the frequency is really important. Councilmember Larmer, we have talked multiple times about that route that you're concerned about. It is a conversation that keeps getting brought up, and I know you're looking at different ways. I know MetroFlex is also very popular in Kent, so your group is doing a fabulous job taking in our recommendations and providing that feedback and making sure that we're getting people around in Kent where they need to be. So thank you very much.
Okay, Councilman Boyd, followed by Lummer.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'd like to follow up with a Councilmember Boyce question about the routes,
Dr. Offline.
the 9 suspended routes. How did we come to suspend these routes and only leaving one route left, the 177? Was these surveys taken on a particular days at a particular time where we found out they were unproductive and low ridership, or was this throughout the week?
Yeah, let me go back to that slide so you can see the full list. So a lot of these routes were actually suspended during Metro's COVID response when we had a really hard time trying to deliver all of our service. And so the peak-only routes, because they do serve a very specific trip purpose, those were ones that we decided to suspend first to be able to maintain the routes that serve more people. So those are like our local all-day, all-week routes. You'll note that not all peak-only routes were suspended. For example, the Route 162 was maintained even during our COVID response because it saw such strong ridership, whereas these routes did not. Since these have been suspended since our COVID response, this project is really deciding the future of these routes. And based on what we heard from the community, as well as what our travel data says about how people are traveling post-COVID, we are seeing the need to really invest again in that local all-day network. And then also recognizing that these routes provide service to Seattle, which is what Link would do as well. It seems like a better use of our resources to be able to invest in getting people to Link for them to be able to reach Seattle and beyond.
Okay, thank you.
Any more question, team? Thank you very much. Really appreciate the presentation, and we look forward to continuing working closer with you. Okay?
Thank you.
Ready. Okay, guys, we are adjourned until 5:15.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Kent City Council Workshop for Tuesday, February 18. We have one item on our agenda, and that is Recode Kent, Creating Housing Options for Project Introductions. And we have Kristen Halsworth. Welcome.
Hi, good evening, Council. It's good to see you. I gave you a whole month off, but I'm back here to talk about implementing the comprehensive plan. So really excited. I know we did a lot of work over the last 2 years to set the foundation through the policy work for creating housing options in Kent. We also have started some of the zoning and subdivision and actual code updates. And so I'm here tonight to present and work with Framework, who are our consultant team. They're going to do the heavy lifting tonight and give you an overview of what this project entails. But I just wanted to thank you all for the support to get to this round. A couple updates on what we've been doing since December when we adopted the comp plan. We did get our letter back from King County on from the Affordable Housing Committee. They had 4 recommended changes. One of them was a non-required item saying, work with us in the future to update your implementation so we can implementation plan, which is a non-required element so that they can track our progress going forward. So relatively minor thing. I think every jurisdiction received that comment. And then the other 3 comments, 2 were saying that we needed to add the word prioritize for prioritizing affordable housing near transit. And we said, we understand your intent. However, most of the housing that's gone in near transit has been affordable or required some subsidy. We need a mix of integrated incomes around transit as well. And so they said, noted. And then Council Chair Balducci had said, so are you saying you're getting subsidized housing in Kent? And we said, yes, almost exclusively around our transit. And she was like, oh, that's a really different situation. And so had a good conversation. Pat was there to talk about how a lot of the times the CPPs will focus really on East and Seattle focused issues, but don't necessarily reflect on the ground conditions. So highlighted that. And then the third one, they just had a question on our methodology. PSRC told us to do it one way. The county asked for us to do it another way. And so we're just deconflicting that, but it won't change anything substantively. So all said and done, we got excellent approval and commendations from the county staff and from the AHC as well. So that's a great update. Mayor and I also went to the Master Builders, King County Builders Council breakfast last week. A lot of what we're discussing tonight that our consultants are going to talk about are things that we've internally been talking about with staff, and we've had some surveys going out to both our staff as well as developers that are frequent flyers in Kent. And so some of the things that we brought up at the breakfast, or that the development community and builders brought up at the breakfast, are things that we've been internally thinking about but haven't said out loud yet. So that was kind of nice to see some confirmation and direction. I want to say tonight, this is an introduction. Nothing is set in stone. We haven't made promises or commitments, but we want to let you know where we're headed and how we're going to intend to create housing options. This is going to touch a variety of different levels of housing, but I think the most substantive one is that middle housing category, which really meets a lot of our ownership entry-level opportunities. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over. This is Tyler and Bobo. They are with Framework Consultant Groups. I'll hang out in the background in case there's any clarifying, grilling questions and you make them cry, but otherwise they have most of the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. Good evening, council members. Great to be with you. My name is Tyler Quinn Smith, and I'm a planner and urban designer at Framework Cultural Placemaking. I'm serving as the project manager for this project, and am joined this evening by Bobo, who I'll allow to introduce herself before we get started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bobo. I'm also a planner and designer at Framework. I'll support Tyler on this project on co-audit and outreach engagement.
Perfect. And if we could go to the next slide, we will just share with you the project branding that the city has come up with. We're really in love with this moniker, Recode Kent, creating housing options. Oh, perfect.
The next slide.
Thank you. This evening we really want to introduce the project to you all, get familiar with City Council, give you the opportunity to ask early questions. I encourage you just to stop me whenever you have something pressing. We also do have a handful of discussion questions throughout the slides, which I believe were in the agenda packet ahead of the night. I'll begin by introducing the rest of the team that's not with us tonight, but are working behind the scenes. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the project goals and kind of what other planning efforts have preceded this effort. And we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about the middle housing strategy, as Kristen alluded to, and then once again open it up for other discussion at the end that hasn't come up throughout the slides. So once again, Bobo and I are here from Framework. We're a small urban design and planning firm based in Capitol Hill in Seattle. We do comprehensive planning, development, and zoning code updates for cities all across the nation. Also do a number of parks planning efforts, arts and cultural planning, master planning, a variety of project types, and have a multidisciplinary team. So on the top left there is the managing principal of Framework, Jeff Arango. He has served as a planning director actually for a city of a little bit smaller city in Vermont in his past, but has also worked for a number of planning consultants. Emily Pressbridge is on our team. She brings a little bit more of an architectural lens with training in architecture and in urban design and planning. Steve Cecil, he's a senior urban designer and planner on the team that has experience working for global urban design firms in the past. And then we are joined by two great sub-consultants, Code Studio down on the bottom left, led by Lee Einsweiler. They have done code and zoning updates for large cities all across the nation. And then Neighborhood Workshop is headlined by Neil Heller. They're based in Portland, and they bring kind of an infill development perspective to the team and will give us some options to test the viability through pro forma testing and so forth when we get into the kind of nuances of the code. And then I would be remiss not to reintroduce our great teammates at the City of Kent. We've had a great time thus far working with Kristen and Deja, and then their colleagues at the department here, and expect to engage with other departments with the City of Kent as well. So here's a peek at the project timeline just to get us started. We are at the first green triangle there on the far left, those indicating the various touch points that we have scheduled with you all, mostly in this workshop format, but towards the end of the project we'll be taking the updates and the amendments through the legislative review process. We also have scheduled times to meet with the Land Use and Planning Board. But broadly speaking, the project can be understood in these three phases, the first of which we're in now, where we're focused on the code audit and the update framework, where we're really seeking to get buy-in from a number of key players, including yourselves, on the direction of the project before we get to the actual substantive amendments. We'll then transition into the update phase itself that will be headlined by an open house, date to be determined there, but we intend to offer both a remote and in-person option sometime in April for community members to review the code and to get some feedback on the amendments as they're drafted. We will then move into the final code update phase toward the end of the spring, and ultimately working toward the adoption required deadline of June 30th, which we do have a fair amount, or a couple weeks of kind of cushion there, scheduling a tentative final meeting with you all in mid-June to meet that legislative mandate. Okay, let's take a step back and first of all commend you all on the long-range planning efforts that many of you have presumably been engaged with in the past that have been focused on housing options, not only the comprehensive plan in this last year, but back in 2021, the city, of course, adopted the Kent Housing Options Plan, which did a number of relevant policy objectives here on the screen that are very much aligned with this project and what this project hopes to implement, revolving around mitigation of displacement, the preservation of existing housing, especially those homes that are naturally occurring of affordable housing, increasing housing variety and choice, just largely. And then these bottom two pieces, very important to the housing ecosystem, but less related to the development code. And then moving on to the last heroic effort that you all were engaged with. I commend you once again for adopting the 2044 comprehensive plan in the last couple months. This, of course, has lots and lots of material that we are seeking to implement with this effort. On the screen here, I have the 6 goals in the housing element, most of which are very aligned with the development code updates that are scoped for this project. We'll talk about other opportunities to kind of further a few more of these. There are also elements for land use, economic development, utilities, et cetera, that do have interplay with the development code that are also aligned with this project. Okay, and one finer point on the comprehensive plan, new to this cycle, surely a big topic of discussion in the plan drafting and growth strategy phases of the comprehensive planning effort, was this notion of not only having a growth target, but having an allocation of affordable housing units, housing need allocation. So as you can see, the distribution there transcends from emergency housing for extremely low income households, 0 to 30% AMI on the far left, all the way to what is market rate and above, 120% and above the area median income on the right. We've outlined those top 3 most AMI bands as being probably the most relevant and appropriate for the type of housing that the middle housing typologies are likely to support. But once again, just suggesting and indicating that the code updates that we are taking on in the Recode Kent effort are aligned with furthering and implementing and building this allocation of affordable housing. Okay, now moving on to the project goals, largely split into 2 big buckets. The first being compliance with state legislation, the second being implementation of comprehensive planning priorities. And I apologize for the lack of contrast here. This
real good on my computer.
This screen, but I assure you we can take your questions as they come up and we can really expand on these points. In reality, the nomenclature on the screen here are just a bunch of arbitrary numbers that correspond to laws that have been passed. And so you all are just as familiar as me with how active the state legislature has been in the last 4 or 5 years in passing mandates down to localities for tweaking zoning codes and doing everything in their regulatory powers to make housing development a little bit easier. And so of particular interest to this project is HB 1110. That is the middle housing legislation that was passed in 2021, I believe, that among other things, for cities of Kent size, which puts the city into the Tier 1 category, requires a minimum of 4 dwelling units per lot across all residentially zoned lots, with the opportunity to go to 6 units per lot in circumstances where affordability and transit adjacency is achieved. So that is most certainly the headliner law that we are seeking to implement in this effort, and it does have a very tangible deadline of the end of June. So this is why we're prioritizing that bill. Just beneath that bill, though, I will point out the design review bill. It is HB 1923. This sought to change the way that cities can conduct design review programs in the state of Washington. And after the code audit and design review audit that our team has already started on, I can assure you that the city, due to its approach with administrative design review, is largely in compliance with the bill. However, there are some supplemental design guideline documents that regulate or guide, rather, multifamily development that we are looking at a little bit more closely. And I tell you this is the reason why, for looking at both the design standards that are in the code that are administratively reviewed by staff and then the design guidelines that are in the supplemental documents, going forward, under the mandates of HB 1110 and the design review bill, we must equalize the design rigor requirements for single family and middle housing. And so that's kind of the finer point of emphasizing the design review during this first phase of the project. I'll also note here that there are a number of bills being contemplated by the legislature during this session. Far too many to go over tonight, but I can assure you that we're tracking those and have a keen awareness of some kind of changes to the way the city regulates housing if those bills were to be passed. And if and when they do, we will kind of recalibrate and evaluate what can be accomplished during this project and what might need to be part of a future effort. So again, apologies for the illegibility on that last slide, but this is your opportunity to ask if you have questions about state mandates, just generally concerns about the city's compliance with any of those measures.
Any questions? I have a question about the parking bill that's in legislature now.
Mm-hmm.
Is it are they eliminating all parking, or is it?
The bill we've commented on heavily. Right now, as it stands, it's 0.5 stalls per unit throughout the entire city. So typically we require 2 stalls per single family detached unit, and then we go down to as many as 0.75 if you're next to light rail coming in or right next to the sounder station. So that would significantly lower beyond what we even allow. So we've had a lot of conversations. It also has some pretty stringent limitations for conversions of buildings and other things that, a restaurant may have a very different need than a hair salon or a drive-through, something that has a drive-through with it. And so we've been commenting on it. We're tracking it closely.
So is that not just residential, it's also for businesses?
It also regulates commercial uses as well.
And how does 0.75 look?
We have some development on the West Hill that they estimated their parking and are underparked right now. And my understanding is it's been a challenge to get fully leased up, and so they're looking to acquire land to add some parking. When light rail comes on, that may be a different story. For businesses, I think it's the conversion of uses in a historic downtown can be quite difficult if off-street parking is required. So there could be some benefits there, but we've addressed that through other programs like a consolidated parking plan. And so I think businesses will likely have a lot of concerns with people parking in front of their stores and other things and turnover. And the critics of the bill have mentioned this, and the proponents of the bill are saying, well, cities can just spin up parking programs and enforcement and all these other things. And those are quite expensive, and it shifts the cost of development from the commercial or private developer onto now the city having to administer new programs. And so we've been having active conversations. Happy to talk more about it after this meeting, but it basically does. They say one size fits all does not fit, and yet what the state's doing is a one size fits all, regardless of proximity to transit. So.
Thank you, Kristen. Councilmember Boyce, followed by Councilmember Michaud, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Hey, Kristen, so is our coding for the houses, are there going to be any changes with the new housing, how we do coding zones and so on? Are there going to be any
like rezones, so we'll get into that in a minute. You're jumping the gun here, but you may remember that for our comp plan, we had, I think, 8 different land use designations for lower density zones, and we did consolidate. We're going to continue some of that work, and I'm going to give away the headline is what we heard strongly from our staff and from the general community, like moms and pops who want to build, as well as developers, is having 4 to 6 different requirements when you still are required to have 4 units per lot makes it really confusing. And my biggest thing is I was front counter for a long time. It's kind of how most planners come up through the system. It's a lot of staff resources for us to call and say, well, we're squabbling over 1,000 square feet on a lot for 4 units. Like the difference of it and having to explain it and the differences is quite extensive from a staff time and from a understanding standpoint for actual flexibility in buildings. So we do have some suggestions, but no decisions on that yet.
And just to follow, so I mean, there need to be some code enforcement too, right? In some of the area, right? I would think, would there be a need for how people park, where they park their cars, and all that type of stuff too?
That ties into some of the parking bills, and that I think that falls into those, again, those unfunded mandates of impacts coming to us that we're not necessarily having financial resources. I don't think a consolidation of zones necessarily will result in that. I think it's more the other bills working together.
Impact to the city though, for us enforcing some of those things.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Michaud, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Kristen, can you briefly tell me what the lot splitting bill is?
Yeah, so lot splitting, and I apologize, we can come do a rundown of where we're at with these bills. It's the first ledge cutoff is this Friday, so my tracking sheet has more than 40 bills on it right now, which is more than the year of housing had. So I don't know what we call this year, but lot splitting is basically, it's a simplified short plat. So it's saying if you have one lot, you can only divide it into 2 lots. So just one time, basically doing a quicker process so that it's really intent for a person that owns the front house to be able to sell the back lot and then allow someone to develop on the back half of their property more quickly than what a typical subdivision or short plat subdivision process is. We've been working extensively on that one as well for some consumer protection concerns.
Any other questions? I think we can continue.
All right, thank you. Great questions. Lots to keep track of this legislative cycle, as with the past. All right, so now moving on to the second bucket of project goals related to implementation of the comprehensive plan that you just passed. So some of these are already aligned with state mandates. Some are previously required by the Growth Management Act, the first of which being the requirement to align the future land use map with the zoning map. So this is kind of an implied process that we're taking on as part of this effort. Secondarily, and perhaps with opportunity to negotiate and prioritize policies, there needs to be some consistency with the land use and housing policies in the comprehensive plan with the corresponding regulations in the development code. And so there are countless, maybe not countless, but certainly a dozen or more goals and corresponding policies in the land use element, housing element, utilities element, et cetera, in the comprehensive plan that directly influence the development regulations, the zoning regulations, many of which have to do with parking, right-sizing parking in a way that balances, the parking demand with the parking supply in the city. There are goals about natural environment protection. And on that particular goal, I'll tease out a bit of a nuance here. Some of this is, in some cases, implied with the approach that we are working on for middle housing, which we'll preview with you in a moment. Other parts, namely the critical areas regulations that the city administers, is a whole other kind of Herculean effort that may need to be addressed in a separate project. That is being addressed in a separate project. I misspoke. So in any case, there are several comprehensive planning policies and goals that are very connected to the development code. And on the next slide here, we'll ask you just that. If, first of all, if you see alignment between some of those goals and policies that were just passed in the 2044 comp plan, an alignment between those goals and the state mandates that we talked about a moment ago. And then as a second question, and we really encourage the discussion here, knowing your familiarity with the comprehensive plan, if there are other policy priorities within that plan you would like this project to consider implementing in addition to the middle housing and kind of legislative mandates that we've already highlighted.
Okay, any feedback, colleagues? Councilmember Fincher?
No, I don't have any feedback on that. I did have a question, though, if you could give any examples of those natural environment protection goals.
Sure. That I will defer to Kristen here. Thank you.
Yeah, so a lot of this does fall under our critical areas ordinance and the FEMA flood map and floodplains requirements. But there are other things like our climate element, which is new, that does talk about urban heat island and other topics. And so as we are looking at updating our housing code, so the comp plan sets the table, right? It says, this is generally the type of food we're having. Is it Caribbean food? Is it Mexican food? What are we having generally for our housing types? And then the code is really what's served to you. So it'll say, okay, you picked these efforts, the environmental protection, diversity of housing types. That's generally what's on the menu. Now here's what we're going to do in the code to make sure that we truly are meeting that requirement. So we are serving tacos, or we are serving whatever specifically within those umbrellas of that type of food. And so that's a really weird metaphor, but it kind of says there's a lot of ways we could do that, right? We could have burritos, we could have tacos, we could have nachos, we could have all these other options. And so as long as we're meeting what these requirements are, that's how we're moving forward. And so the protection of the natural environment, that also includes things like the Green River natural area. There's other components of it as well. So as we're talking about housing code, if there's things we need to consider within those already established policies in the comp plan, we'll be running it through kind of a screen check to make sure that we're helping to achieve those other goals as well, even though they're not directly in the housing element.
Councilor Troutner, please.
Thank you, Madam President. So we updated the comprehensive plan, and we have these areas that we want to see developed and see improvements in. Do we have any developers or any projects that have come before the city where we need to start implementing those changes now and focus on certain areas? Or are we just kind of looking at everything as a whole right now?
So I'm going to answer this two ways. One is the very legalese way of certain projects are vested. So if they already have their permits in before the comp plan was updated or this code update, state law and a bunch of case law says we allow them to move forward, and that's really for project predictability. It'd be really rough to say, well, you submitted 6 months ago, but now you have to completely redo something. So those projects that are in the pipeline will continue forward, but there are things that we're talking about. I think the one that sticks in my mind most is around zero lot line or unit lot subdivision where we have townhomes. We have code right now that says they must be under a condo ownership structure instead of fee simple, which would be a typical subdivision, and that can be really difficult. We've heard from the development community. I just fielded 2 calls last week where they said, you have these requirements that are so onerous, I'm not able to, I can build the project, but the financing, because of the end result of rental, condo, or fee simple, because you're forcing me into the condo situation, I can't get financing for it. And so from my perspective, a community member on the street, someone walking by, a townhome looks like a townhome. It's hard to know whether it's an ownership as a condo or as a fee simple. And so looking at some of those things I think are really relevant right now as we're looking at how are we creating home ownership opportunities. Mm-hmm. And the code was there for a good reason at that time. A lot of times what happens is we just don't have the resources and staffing to do the need to projects because we have the must meet legislative requirements. And so this is a really good time for us to go through, and Framework did a really good code audit to say, here's things that may not be legislatively mandated, but if we're in the code already, let's look at this and reduce some of those barriers. And so I think that's the one that stands out in my mind right now. In terms of geographic areas, Benson Corridor is going to be its own project. This really is focusing on what typically is those yellow areas that are lower density residential. There will be some very specific things about permanent supportive housing and emergency housing, conversion of our commercial buildings to housing that will touch some of our transit areas more directly, but really we're looking more in the yellow areas. And so one of our questions is, are there parts within that yellow zoning that you think we should be focusing more or less? And you guys are putting us through our presentation.
Any other questions or comments? Does anybody want to, think that we see alignment between local goals and state mandate is obviously we all agree that there's a housing shortage and we need to be doing something about that. So, so I think that's where I see the alignment. And then there's things like parking restrictions coming up that kind of makes it hard for communities, but we'll see where that bill goes. With that, I guess we can move on.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to zoom in a little bit more into some preliminary thinking. None of this is adopted, even fully agreed upon. You know, all this is up for debate, and that is around the middle housing regulatory approach. So some of this has already been alluded to in that the city currently has a number of zones that regulate or that allow single-family detached development, right? And kind of the key component of this middle housing bill is to require cities to allow for up to 4 units on those lots that previously allowed 1. And in some cases allow up to 6 in circumstances of affordability and transit proximity. Now, due to especially the fringe and edges of the city.
I'm just going to see if the highlight makes some of these call-outs easier to see.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no, it doesn't.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm so sorry. Your council chambers is much brighter than others that we've been in, but we will ensure this does not happen again. But I'll walk you through this the best I can, despite the legibility here. So I guess just starting on actually the far left, the city has some properties that are zoned SR1, and because of and that's over here in the blue. Because of the way the city annexed King County land in the past, those are in many cases designated as urban separators by King County. Now those parcels are exempt under this bill for middle housing. However, there are still some other parcels in SR1 that do need to allow for 4 units on those lots, and so we would restrict but allow up to 4 units on some of those lots. In the SR3, we've learned that the parcels with this designation are largely concentrated around Lake Meridian and other shorelines, and as such need to be treated with sensitivity due to the environmental implications of being on the shoreline. Not to mention other regulations that come from the state that require cities to treat that a little bit differently. But for those reasons, that will remain its own kind of zone as is. It will need to allow for up to 4 units an acre at base compliance for HB 1110, but will largely remain intact and as zoned as it is now. Just the city would enable a little bit more density on that. Now, the larger change that we're contemplating is the consolidation of the 4 zones on the right. So this is SR 4.5, SR 6, SR 8, and MRD, which is the city's existing duplex multifamily residential zone. Not only due to the alignment on densities and planned intentions of development patterns in the comprehensive plan, but also objectively through some of the regulations that are in place for these zones, it makes a lot of sense to consolidate it into one, knowing that the baseline compliance for HB 1110 makes possible and kind of unifies the development pattern possibilities in zones across these, or in parcels across these 4 zones. So simply put, this is kind of one element of the regulatory approach that we've begun discussing with city staff. It's also been a topic of discussion with developers. Kristen noted at the top that she and the mayor had the opportunity to go to a luncheon with the master builders just last week, and this was certainly a topic of interest of theirs. So I will just leave this here, and we can take questions on this component of the approach, but I'm going to move us forward to some other highlights of the regulatory approach. Continue to apologize for the challenge of reading here, but understanding that one possible approach to this project would be to consolidate those 4 zones that I just talked about, SR 4.5 through the MRD. There is a baseline requirement, which I've continued to say, 4 dwelling units per lot. This is a little bit of a shift compared to the historical regulation of density, which has typically been revolving around dwelling units per acre. Because of the way the bill is written and the law is written, we need to begin thinking about units per lot. So in some circumstances, that will drive the density per acre a little bit higher than what's been, even allowed in some of the multifamily zones. We'll discuss that in a moment. And we need to consider, for the purposes of some parcels in this consolidated zone that are larger, there is an opportunity to consider what we call scalable density. And so in some circumstances, by limiting just to 4 units on, let's say, just for purposes of simplification, there was a 1-acre lot in this new zone. If we're only allowing 4 units on that enormous lot, we're still only achieving 4 units an acre there. In some cities that we've worked with, they've understood that the intent of the law is to, in some cases, densify the net density beyond what would be, I guess it would be capped to by just considering the unit density. So in that circumstance, we in other cities have worked with a net density requirement of, say, 12 to 18 units an acre on those larger lots. If you follow the unit per lot option, you only get 4. But if you follow the net density option, you might get 8 to 12. And so in that circumstance, the city could take the approach of allowing whatever produces the higher number of units.
I'm going to jump in real quick.
Sure.
There's also ways we can structure this for incentives. So to say you can get more units if you are preserving existing trees, if you're creating more open space. So giving more density with additional incentives for that. So it's a way we can think about it. Otherwise, what would happen is anyone that has an acre lot is just going to subdivide it and then add those units anyways. So it's a way for us to kind of think more strategically through how can we get the products we want without, the goal is not to increase housing costs, but there's things that are valuable to our community that we want to get those incentives for. So there's opportunity there. It's not just you get this great option without also providing some additional amenities or other items to the community writ large.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Right. So there certainly are a number of regulatory considerations that we're going to start to unwind in the forthcoming slides here that Kristen alluded to, including structuring density or structuring incentives, right, to achieve that net density if that's an approach that the city would like to take. So another component of the bill, it was on the last slide, but I'll reiterate it here. The unit types or the middle housing types allowed must kind of tick a certain number of boxes. There are 9 types of middle housing that are defined in the law. They're on the bottom here: duplex, triplex, 4, 5, and 6plex, stacked flats, townhomes, cottage housing, and courtyard buildings. The city must allow 6 of those 9 types in these zones that are influenced by this legislation. And so these are other components of the regulatory structure that we're beginning to chew on. Next, we, again, a few more considerations when thinking about this new consolidated zone, if that's the approach. Incentives to mitigate displacement, right? This is a key theme, not only in the Kent Housing Option Plan, but also the comp plan. And what if there were incentives to retain existing homes? How does that unit count toward the new units that are allowed for on that lot? That's something we're thinking about. I encourage you to speak up on as well if you have thoughts there. Open space and amenity requirements, right? Especially as we're talking about these larger lots, which we may allow a little bit more development if we take the net density approach. Well, what's the tree retention requirement? What's the open space or amenity space requirement for those larger lots to enable, some sort of semi-public gathering space for people to have picnics and small gardens, et cetera, just communal spaces to share on the lawn, et cetera. Reasonable parking requirements. There are some baseline requirements in the legislation that we are implementing. They largely revolve around transit proximity and lot size. We can get into those nuances if you're interested, but there are some limitations that the city can place in terms of parking required per unit. And then before I pause, just thinking about the edge of this zone, right? So this consolidated zone, if that's the approach, will be abutting the SR1 zone in some cases. Well, how are we going to treat that transition? What does that mean in terms of landscaping and open space requirements to help with that transition environmentally and ecologically? So I can pause there. I see maybe there's some questions that have
Councilmember Troutner, please.
Yep. Thank you, Council President. Will you remind me, is there a restriction to how high we can go?
So our
current code
is normally 2.5 stories, or I think there's a number attached to it, like 30 feet, whichever is less. That's another option here where we could say, if you're building certain housing types that we find more desirable or in certain locations, a lot of times townhouses they can be 2 stories, but typically they like to be 3 stories for efficiency's sake. And so there could be something where we say in certain instances, we'll allow additional height in order to achieve other goals. So that's something that's on the table. There's a lot of on-the-table flexibility options that we're going to preview for you tonight, and then we're going to get into it in much more detail in our next session.
Thank you.
I think I just had a question about the retain existing homes. So if we didn't have anything to not retain existing home, would it be more attractive to developers than families trying to buy housing?
So the pro formas that I've seen, and I was just talking with a think tank back in DC, and they ran some numbers in Washington, Western Washington, as well as in order to make a project pencil, if there's an existing dwelling unit and they want to tear it down, they have to have at least 4 units. So the state law was really they picked 4 for a reason. And we're in Kent, we testified a lot saying a lot of these housing types are actually meeting multi-generational households, a lot of immigrant households that are doubling up initially or have other reasons. And so we're worried that this could lead to especially because we don't have a lot of homeowner restrictions and covenants like wealthier cities, this could lead to decimating our naturally occurring affordable housing. So this is one way that we've already identified as there may be some really strong incentives so that whoever keeps that front house can continue to live in Kent, whether they're renting it out or they live there currently, and they can do some development in their backyard to help offset whatever rising costs, inflation, whatever, but we still maintain that as a housing product that will be more affordable than a new build would ever be.
Councilwoman Michaud, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Yes, I would prefer to have some of these incentives. I think we need some sort of way to offset the negative impacts of density. And so some of these things could do that.
Tree retention.
And things that I've thought too, and I think that we talked with the development community, it's very different if it's Bob and Sally living in a home trying to add something into their backyard versus someone who's strategically acquired 3 acres and is a developer, and what we can expect in terms of flexibility. It's much harder to fit something on that smaller site that the longtime residents have done versus someone who's a builder and has at their disposal. They're going to be doing all the stormwater and all these other things and can have that flexibility. So that's something we've talked about too, is really the scaling of it, of not that, again, we're not trying to add more costs, but what we can expect if you're wiping a slate more or less clean versus trying to keep all the houses is a very different conversation.
Councilmember Larimer, please. And Councilmember Fincher.
Sorry. I just want to say I really like the incentive to preserve that front house. That's what we actually did with my grandmother's property, and it allowed her to stay in her home through, pretty much through her death. And so into her 90s, she was at home, and so it was a nice solution to we could afford that because we sold off that back piece. So,
Great example.
yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember Fincher, please.
I like all three of the incentives, at least the three that I picked up on: the tree plan, retaining existing home, and communal space. The communal space especially would be dependent on a larger piece instead of a smaller piece. But I think all of those would be benefits for Kent and for the residents living there.
This is really excellent, and I'm seeing head nods throughout, so thank you for this early direction. I think we want to be conscious of your time, so I'm thinking maybe we preview a couple things that will be coming.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great questions. So just here, very quickly, there are a number of development regulations that cities use, including Kent, to ensure that there's not too much impervious surface, to ensure the building bulk and scale is contextual, right? We're not seeing enormous blocks of development that are largely run counter to the development pattern in the neighborhood. There are a number of other elements that the city uses today and that could be added to in terms of like where the parking is located on the site. Maybe there's requirements kind of more on the design side, but also further some of the other housing goals for quality, like maybe there's a transparency requirement or requirements for entrance orientation to make sure that the entries are obvious if you're on the street, connections, right, on foot rather than using the driveway. All sorts of bells and whistles that some of which the city has already, some of which we are considering including in the regulatory approach. And then I'll just highlight two questions that have come back in our survey that is being taken by developers right now, some of which that Kristen has already talked about. But here the question is, which of Kent's code development regulations, standards, and or other requirements are most challenging to satisfy? And we'll just point out, and this is actually without further discussion with the folks that have taken this, so we just want to take it as a grain of salt right now. But design standards, in this case, being highlighted as a barrier, right? So that's another big part of this project. We will be discussing with master builders and other folks in the development community to really explore that challenge, right? What is it about the design standards that you're finding problematic? Also on the screen, development standards, that's a whole bucket of items that we can talk about, but just beginning to show some of the feedback that's come through. This question asking about specific project components that they foresee being popular and highly in demand in new projects. A little bit contradictory, seeing both smaller units and larger units being in higher supply, but it's all a matter of maybe perspective of where these developers are coming from and their typical housing choice or housing type. Co-housing and co-living, multi-generational living has been marked as kind of an other development type, detached dwelling units, accessory dwelling units, lower price points. A lot of this is aligned with some of the discussions and understanding we've had internally. So with this, I will certainly take any comments that are related to the content that we've already received or already gone through, but have a couple of other particular questions we'd like you to consider kind of about this approach that we've just teased out for the middle housing. All of it is preliminary, and we look forward to shaping it up and refining it with your feedback and then the feedback from staff and other departments and then other key players in the process as well.
And this is our last question / slide, so discussion.
Feel
input.
free to open it up.
Councilmember Fincher, please.
Yeah, back on the other part about incentivizing, and I think for anyone who is doing extra in their build, so when it comes to environmental integrity of a property, if they are, instead of building just the minimum to meet the minimum standards if they have to do, but they're adding bioswales, they're adding, the rain gardens, that they're taking extra steps to make sure that the runoff water is going to be cleaner by the time it hits the sound. If they are doing extra, that they can be incentivized for that.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I want to add the certain type of housing that should be emphasized. I think it should be step to home ownership. I think that's very important for our future generations because it's getting very expensive to own a home for. I think my son might not be able to afford a house in the future, so that's something we definitely need to consider. Yeah, Councilmember Larmer, please, and followed by Councilmember Boyce.
Yeah, so on the housing types to emphasize, I agree, ownership opportunities, but also I love the cottage housing with a central courtyard area. I lived in one 25 years ago, and the people I lived with became my community, and we're still friends 25 years later. So it really is a great community building opportunity. And ours was actually sited in amongst single-family housing. We had a unit of, I think there was 15 of us. So yeah, it was really cool.
We did a very non-scientific visual preference survey of these housing types during summer when we were doing the comp plan, just to gear up for this project, and so the community wasn't as shocked when we start talking about it in more detail. And the top ones were townhomes, cottage housing, and duplexes. And I think townhomes are more prevalent in people's minds. We see them a lot more. And then cottage housing, when I would ask why, it was because they liked having a little bit of the detached between the units. And so there's a lot of conversations right now about detached products that are smaller and ways to incentivize, because typically your foundation and your walls are the same, and so where the profit comes is when you build up and when you build out. And so how we incentivize that smaller unit is something that's going to be, I think, a key question in getting to that closer to entry level affordability price point.
What was the flat? What was the option? Was flat stacks?
Stack flats.
So if you think of a townhome as it's vertical, so each of the units is side by side, stacked flats would be turning the townhome so that it's more like you have a 3-story building and one staircase, and a family or household lives on the first floor, the second floor, and the third floor.
Is that ownership or?
Can be ownership, can also be rental, can be, so it's really more of it's less of a, it's more of a, like a design style, because you could have a triplex that is a stacked flat. You could have a triplex that is a townhome. So it's more like the form of the housing than the actual number of units. So the legislature, when they wrote the bill, kind of threw in number of units and forms of housing all together. So you could have a fourplex that is also townhomes or stacked flats.
Thank you. Councilmember Boyce, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, probably don't know the answers. When we talk about the price point, what kind of price point are we looking at when we talk about these middle house home?
Yeah, so Commerce says that they come in at 80% AMI. I think that's high for the Kent community because our detached single family is coming in at 80% AMI, if not lower. And so I think for Kent, at least in our current market for the foreseeable next, I'm not in the market of crystal ball reading, but don't know what mortgage rates will be, but I think for the next 5 years or so, it's highly likely that those will be coming in more affordable than a detached 2,000 square foot, 2,500 square foot new home. So I think they would probably be in that 60 to 80% or 50 to 80% pretty easily.
So have we thought about having people move into the homes, right? And they kind of build up a little bit of equity, take the equity and go buy another home and have someone else come in and do the same thing. That's part of the process and the conversation around that.
That is something that happens naturally in our market. There are things like community land trusts. I used to work in Snohomish County, and there was a program that they since defunded, but it literally did that where it allowed people that could afford a mortgage that was or a rent that was the same as their mortgage to have some of those barriers removed, but it did cap how much equity they could build so that they would be able to move on and they could keep that house more affordable at that price point. So those are normally programs that typically like a city wouldn't run. It's more of a housing authority or other programs, but I think those are things that nothing in our code would restrict it from happening, but I think we would probably need to have a coalition of South King County or King County as a whole to talk about administering that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or concerns? Questions? Okay. Councilmember Troutner, please.
Thank you, Council President. So as we're seeing these questions here, if we have other additional thoughts, do we contact you? Do we contact who?
My email is always open, or a phone call works great too, and we can set up time for a Zoom call or Teams call or stopping by the office and so any of that. These were starting to kind of we've had 2 full months off, guys. I needed to re-dip you into this. And so by no way is this your final chance for input. We will be coming back in a month to have more guided conversation. I think your next slide is about where we're going. We have because we heard a lot about utilities, right-of-way, public works, fire, other departments that we work closely with. We're having a cross-department, I'm keeping them up, those cross-department meetings to talk about some of the initial survey results that we've had from staff and developers and talk about opportunities that we can then bring to you all as here's some challenges that we heard, here's some opportunities. How do you all feel about this? But please email me in the interim and we can figure out whether phone or conversation or just email is sufficient.
Sounds good.
That's all we had. Thank you for the extra couple minutes. And again, apologies for the slide legibility. I assure you, if you look at this on your own screen or print it out, it will be a little bit easier to read. But we're going to be back with you in a month. Really look forward to furthering this discussion and appreciate the questions tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll email slides.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Baba. Thank you, Kristen. And with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.